Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to And She Thrived, which serves to hold space to Muslim divorced women. And we are also expanding our topics to serve women in general. Any topics that pertain to being better, to relationships, to healing, to just leading a more functional and holistic life. So today I've got Husna Sharif with me, and she has been a lifelong resident of New Jersey, working in the nonprofit sector and spending her free time volunteering for local social service organizations and Muslim relief organizations. After marriage, she moved to Northern Virginia just under 3 years ago and currently resides there. She's passionate about learning, spending time with her loved ones, and serving her community in any capacity she can. She is currently working on completing her studies in Yunani Tib, that would be Greek Arab medicine, and has a deep interest in living a holistic, healthy lifestyle that promotes mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Marhaban, welcome, Husna. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so just to set the stage here for everyone, just to give you the disclaimer that Husna has not been previously divorced. However, I've asked her to join us today because, as we are all well aware, that there seems to be some kind of a Muslim marriage crisis internationally, where people are finding it increasingly more difficult to get married, whether they are single, whether they are widowed, or whether they are divorced. So this is a problem that kind of plagues everyone. And so I'm connecting with Husna today to explore what was her journey in approaching the process of finding a spouse. So Husna, my first question to you would be that I know that we've spoken before, and it took you many years until well, let's say it took you much longer than you had anticipated to find your current spouse. So if you would just be able to share with us your journey, we'd love to hear.
Sure, yes. Yeah, so, I got married at the age of 42, for the first time. And, typically the assumption, when people hear that is like, oh, she must have, been focusing on her career, or she may have been too picky, or, all these assumptions that I think generally people have. Um, And the reality was it wasn't that. Actually, I remember graduating with my undergrad from college and thinking, okay, now what I want to do is, I want to get married, I want to have a family, kids. I wanted that to be my primary focus. So, in terms of meeting people after college, it does get difficult. I think now there are definitely more avenues created to try to help people meet each other. But back then, I'm talking about in the early 2000s, there weren't like a ton of options, right? Besides, your parents introducing you to people that come through, like, your local Rishta ladies or aunties or family. So I was very open to that as well, because my philosophy was you never know, right? You never know who you're going to meet, who you're going to connect with. So I had gone down that route. And I also, back then there were like, it was at the start of, um, I guess, like websites to kind of meet people, right? Back then it was almost like a little taboo, but for me, I was like, I thought it was kind of like a brilliant idea. I was like, okay, well, you post your profile online and it's a closed platform that allows you to like, you know, meet like people or kind of get to know like a quick bio of different people, and maybe you could see if you're compatible. So I remember even kind of going down that route, and I met people through there. And it was just like, I would just sometimes think like, like, what is it like, why is this process so like difficult for me, um I was generally not like a picky person. What I wanted, and I guess maybe everybody says that, but what I was looking for was just somebody who was very like deen oriented, right? Deen oriented meaning not somebody who had to have this level of knowledge, but somebody who was passionate about learning about the deen, and serving God, right? And then, you want somebody who, um, like your personality clicks, right? And maybe that you see like, you have similar views on different things. So, that's what I was looking for. And I did meet, good people along the way. But either it just never came to like fruition, right? Whether it was something that I felt uncomfortable with or whether it was the other person, it was just many years of just kind of that, you know? So, but yeah, then when I met my husband, it was
Let's put
like,
a timeline on this. So if you, this is after college, so you must have been in your 20s.
yeah, exactly, in my early 20s. In my
Okay.
early 20s.
And you met your husband how many years later?
But like 22 years later.
Okay, so you seem to be a very optimistic, kind of cheerful person. So how was that for you? Were you optimistic and cheerful the whole time?
No, definitely it was a journey. I think there was a lot of growth that needed to happen, you know. Sometimes I feel like, you know, I needed to become the person that I am now to have been ready for marriage. And I see that now. And what I mean by that is, um, I think I needed to know myself more. You know, sometimes when people get married young, they grow together and, they kind of um they come into their own, but like with a partner, right? And you kind of help each other along the way. And it made me realize that Allah has a plan for everybody and He knows what works best for us. For someone like me, I think if I had gotten married early, maybe I would have like lost myself completely in a marriage, just kind of just my personality. I think I would have been like just so into serving my husband, my family, that I think I would have maybe not even known myself and maybe not had the confidence that I do now, which I think is important. Definitely it wasn't all optimism. Um, what I had to do was there was points where I would get really down, where I would be like, okay, something didn't work out, let's say, and it would kind of put me in a place where it was just like immense sadness, right? Because and then you get to a point as you get older, right? Because when you're in your 20s, you're a different person, and then when you're in your 30s and your 40s, you're a different person, right? So even your approach to marriage changes, you know. For me, in terms of what I was looking for, it was never um I didn't necessarily change like my criteria over those years. I remember even when I started off like looking to meet people in my 20s, I was equally, open to like divorced men, men with children, um, men with any kind of experience. Like, sometimes people like, veer away from the deen and then come back. For me, what was critical was that the person that they are now, that's what it is, right? And so Allah brings everybody through a different journey. So if they had a past, if they went through a divorce, if they lost a spouse, I didn't necessarily it didn't bother me, and I talked to many, potential suitors over the years that had that background, and it was interesting because I would sometimes have conversations with friends and then they would be like, yeah, I can't marry somebody who's had a past, or I don't know if I can marry somebody who's been divorced. And this is I'm talking about like maybe in our 20s when I had these conversations. I mean, the conversations that I've had with my friends and the single friends in the past, 10, 15 years has been different. But in my 20s, it was very much like the sentiment, like, oh, I can't be with somebody who's done that or who's been there. And, my philosophy always was like, if you have a great person in front of you right now, I mean, it's their past, it's their journey that took them to be where they are right now. So the person that you like, if a person's been divorced or if they've lost a spouse or if they've had some sort of crazy past, I mean, if they're the person that you want to marry or are considering now, then that journey was worth it for them. Um,
I think that's a great attitude to have because there's so many people we meet out there, the ones who have never, females who have not been married before. But I'm sure this is the same situation on the male side where they insist that they want to marry somebody who's never been married before, who doesn't have children. And to be frank, it's just going to make it that much harder because you get phenomenal people, whether they've been
exactly.
right. And the thing is that it's not like divorce was a bad thing. Like if anything,
Exactly.
but I must put a disclaimer here though. I must put a disclaimer. In my personal opinion, I think that the caveat is that it's a person who has been divorced, but has also been through some kind of self journey of work. to become more self-aware and to improve his or her situation. Because I think if a person does not go through that, it's very likely that they could carry a lot of negative things into the subsequent marriage. But by the inverse, they could also carry in really phenomenal new strategies and tools and skills because of the learning journey that they've been on. But yeah, so to just keep an open mind with that. And I also wanted to ask you, so you said that your criteria didn't change, but did your strategy change of how you were approaching? Or did you just sort of give up and say, you know what, whatever God brings me?
So I did go through phases of that, you know. What did I had a word for it. I can't think of it right now, but it was almost like essentially I would take a break, right? Because for me, I was actively looking to get married. So if somebody, you know, if my parents brought somebody to me, yes, I would meet them, and I didn't, you know, I wasn't like, oh, mom, like not right now. I'm taking a break. You know, I couldn't be like that. So in those cases, I would meet anybody who's, you know, who approached my parents. But in terms of what the efforts that I was making, right? So I did the whole online thing, you know, before apps were even a thing, it was like websites, right? And then I also did like a bunch of like those, which I think are really good events that Muslim organizations are now putting on, which are like those single events where you meet people and you get a chance to talk to different people, and some of them have that like speed dating type setup, where you're like, you're given like 30 seconds, and like have to talk to the person in front of you, and and then like you talk to the next person, so I've done stuff like that. And so when I was but yeah, over the that 20 something years, there's plenty of times, and especially as I got older, where I was taking breaks and longer breaks, because I was just like, this is taking up a lot of energy, and I don't want to expend all my energy on this. And I did have to work on my faith, right? So I had to tell myself, okay, if Allah has somebody written for me, it'll come. And so that's what would give me ease. And during the times that I was not making an effort, sometimes I would have conversations with Allah being like, listen, Allah, I can't make an effort right now. So if it's just too much, it's too draining for me. So if there is somebody, you'll bring them to me. And so right now I'm not tying my camel. So, just like forgive me and make it easy. So that was kind of my attitude. It was definitely, and like I said, as I got older, those break periods kind of were longer and longer. And then I came to a point where I was like, maybe marriage is not going to happen for me, right? After all these years, I mean, it's possible. I was like, there's plenty of people that don't get married. So, I also had to kind of take on that attitude, but also be content with it, right? So that contentment, I think, is the difficult part, right? Because you can say, okay, Allah, if I don't end up getting married, that's okay. But if that's something that your heart wants, to find contentment in that, I think it's a lot of like self-reflection and a lot of um, focusing on blessings and working on your gratitude. Um, but yeah, it was definitely not like just, this same process for all these years.
I think it's a very good reminder about contentment, because even though we theoretically know that I mean, a lack of contentment, a lack of rida is that one of the diseases of the heart. So we know that theoretically, but when it really, in practical application, it's very challenging. It's
Oh
almost
yeah.
a reminder that, this is something that God might not want for me. And
Yeah.
and if he does, and even if he doesn't, it doesn't mean that my life has ended. It doesn't mean that I have to stop working on myself or becoming spiritually closer to him, etc., or working on my other relationships in my life, etc. So it's just being in a state of surrender and shukr, as you said, gratitude.
Yeah.
Mhm. And
No,
so,
that's definitely important. Like, I had to tell myself, okay, like I had to focus on the blessings, right? And I was like, okay, if this is if this is the worst thing that's that I'm dealing with right now, then alhamdulillah, because when you look, around the world and like you see what people are going through, it kind of puts things in perspective, right? And then I would think, okay, like, for me, like my nieces and nephews, like are one of my greatest sources of joy, and I lived really close to them. So I would tell myself that I was like, like Allah gave me like these, you know little people in my life that, that love me unconditionally and that I love unconditionally, and I have a good relationship with them. And, so I would try to kind of just focus on the blessings, and then, you have an opportunity to live your life in a way that it's just you, right? So I would focus on that, and be like, okay, well, as much as I want a partner in life to kind of get, like go through the journey with, um, it's also something that's really great to be able to have the autonomy to kind of do what I want and live the way that I want to without having to really worry about, another person, So those were the things that I would tell myself to be like, okay, it's okay. This is Allah has filled our lives with blessings, so this is what I need to focus on.
So, Husna, you remind me of I spoke to a gentleman in his 50s some time back, and I remember him saying that he doesn't like to talk to women who are over 42 years old or something like that. And I said, why 42? And he said, I noticed that there's a kind of a almost like a light in their eyes that just disappears. Like they become cynical with life, like almost embittered with life, and they lose that sort of
Wow.
and youthfulness. And I remember thinking, and that was a while back, and I'm thinking, oh God, like I'm in that age group now, and it's true. It's true because oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many women I've spoken to who are just so disillusioned. Not even women,
Yeah.
even men, like they just say, I've given up. This whole process is it's a flawed, it's a broken system, it's
Yeah.
a pain system, it's we don't have families and communities who are connecting us. uh, in a way can be very humiliating and degrading. I've heard stories about people who attend these as you mentioned, these speed dating gatherings, and they'll say it's very obvious that the most attractive and fair-skinned woman in the room will draw all the attention, and everybody else is just standing there. And I've never personally attended one of those, but
Yeah.
I've heard it just sounds like a horrible situation,
Yeah.
and it's something that we have to address. And I suppose I feel very passionate about this. Like I feel very strongly in terms of networking people I know to connect them so that they can possibly have a chance of love and marriage. And we need more people, I think, who can get involved and be the aunties. I guess we are the aunties now.
We are.
Yeah, and I don't, when I say aunties, I don't mean that only for the young people, because
Yeah.
in their 30s and
Exactly.
they're still looking.
Exactly. I just like to add that, especially being single for so long and being active in the process of looking, because, there's people out there who just kind of don't look or who don't want to make that kind of effort for whatever reasons. There's definitely been, and I'm sure maybe men could say the same thing about women, but, I'm only speaking from the perspective of a woman, that there has been a deterioration, I think, of just of just society in a way, of people, of like men, women, but in my experience of just men, and I think partly what contributes to that is, the apps and stuff that kind of make it easier for you to be able to be so nonchalant in meeting people, right? I think that's a part of it. Uh, the other thing is that, what kept me going in the whole 20-year process where, yes, I would have major dips, but what made me not lose hope is that you see that all types of people get married, whether they're beautiful, whether they're, it doesn't matter level of education, how beautiful they are, the type of person, the personality, it doesn't matter. People get married all around you. There's no formula. Oh, you have to be this level, you have to have this level of beauty and this level of education and this level of to and your chances are higher. There's no such thing as probability in terms of finding a spouse. It's all nasib. So that is what made me never lose hope. I never gave up. Yeah, I would have again moments of dip and moments of where I didn't uh, make an active effort, but I always felt, okay, if Allah, it's nasib. So if it's meant for me, it's going to come for me whether I make an effort or not. And I think that's where I think that's where the focus being is really helpful. If you just think that, okay, inshallah, this is nasib. If it's meant for me, it's going to happen. Again, I think, Allah gives us that mercy where you see people around you, like I said, and every type of person gets married, right? Young, old, like all kinds of people. So if it's meant for you, it'll happen, inshallah.
Okay, so back to
Exactly.
the story. So then what happened next? How did you come to meet your husband?
So I was on a particular app for about, I would say maybe 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And at that point, I wasn't really looking to, I was like, I'm not sure if this is going to work, right? I was like, this is me just, I make dua that Allah grant me like a righteous, loving spouse, and I need to make an effort. So this is me making an effort, right? So it was very half-hearted. I've been on many other websites, used different apps, had a bio data that my parents used to share. So I had created profiles many times. And so when I created this, I was like, okay, this is just me having to do it again. I didn't have much hope. I shouldn't say a hope. I didn't put that much stock in this. I was like, if I meet somebody, great. If I don't, my profile is sitting there. So what would happen was I had set up my profile. I, would check it sometimes and then sometimes not. It wasn't something that I was like diligent about. I would say like I met my husband at the end of 2020. And so before that, this was like in COVID. I was like, let me just try to make, and I would go through periods of this where I was like, let me just try to make more of an active effort. So I did. I was like just on the app more and just, I don't know, just trying to see if I could meet people and talk to people. And I did. And it was honestly one disappointment after the other. That's a whole other conversation about the type of the types of like I think people that are that are out there right now, especially on these things. I think on the apps, on these like there's so many people out there looking to meet people, but with all these options that are available, like the apps and the events and all of these things, I think there's also created like a culture of just kind of not taking it very lightly, right? And so that's the one thing that I had found over the 20 years towards like the end before I met my husband, where men tended to just, I think, take it very lightly, right? So it's hard to decipher then who's serious about marriage versus who's not. So, and again, this was COVID. Like I said, I was getting a little bit more active, and then um yeah, then I met my husband on the app and we started talking, and it was so strange because it's like the cliche stuff that people tell you all the time that you don't want to hear, which is like, oh, like when you meet them, you'll know. But that's actually what happened, which was and it was, anytime that I had talked to somebody in the past, whether it was somebody that I had really, I had an interest in and wanted to take further or not, I always had this like gut feeling where I was like, okay, well, this is not going to work out. That didn't stop me from like following through and, seeing, talking to the person till closure. But it was always a feeling, and I remember and so when I met my husband on the app, we literally like within 3 weeks, we made the decision to get married. And from the time that I met him to the time that I got married, it was 2 months, which is like insane. That's not something that would even normally I would do. I'm somebody who's very like detail oriented, very like calculating. And so subhanAllah, it just worked out that way. But I remember the first time I talked to him, I was like, where's that feeling that always told me like, oh, this isn't going to work out? It wasn't there, you know? And it was just like a feeling of just like sukoon. And, with my husband, he had been married before and he had children and he lost them in a tragic incident. So, those are things that you would typically think like, okay, I need more time to kind of, figure out, if this makes sense, if that person is ready. And subhanallah, it just kind of was one thing after the other. It was one thing after the other. And I think back now and I'm like, Allah just wanted it to happen that way. And like sometimes I'll think, okay, maybe I should have done this, or maybe we should have talked longer, or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that Allah wanted it to work out this way, and so then it did. But yeah, we weren't, for me, like I said, I was on the app for I think 3, 4 years, and he had been on the app for 2 weeks. So I also think that men have a completely different experience with this stuff. Um, yeah, so then we met, within like 3 weeks, we decided to get married, and then 2 months later, we were married. So that,
Okay. One thing that comes to mind for me is that many people say that the difficulty with getting married, you could say older. And when I say older, I mean probably in the 40s and up, that as women, we become so set in our ways and of doing things that it becomes harder to be a wife because we're not as flexible. This is often an argument why men say that they prefer to marry a woman who's younger and more moldable. What do you think about that?
I think that's a blanket statement. I'm not sure if I would completely agree with that. And I think you can say the same thing. If you say that about women, I think you can say the same thing about men. If, if women are not, set in their ways and not able to be moldable, right? Moldable. Same thing would apply for men, right? At a certain age. And I think to a certain degree, that's probably expected and normal. If you've lived your way for a certain period of time, you're in your 40s, regardless of gender, you're going to be used to the same, a particular way of doing things. I think that's not a valid criteria, though, when you're looking to meet somebody, right? Because if you're looking to meet somebody of a particular age, let's say like a 50 or a 40 something year old man is looking to meet somebody, to have like an age cutoff doesn't really make sense to me. Just to go back to your point about the man that said, I don't like to talk to people over 42. I remember in my 20s attending a singles event and seeing women there that were older. And I had the same thought actually that, these women seem like they're jaded, they're, and I then, I myself got to that age single and I felt myself being jaded. So I remember having that memory, like when I was, whether I was like, again, like making my efforts to try to meet people, I must be giving off a vibe that makes me seem like I'm jaded. But I think that's also like, I think that's also part of the process. I think the fact that you are making an effort shows that you're not completely jaded, shows that you still are pursuing marriage. At the age, when you reach like, when you get to your 40s or your late 30s or even older, yeah, it's definitely a lot harder. You have all these different thoughts going through your head, like, I'm older. It's going to be harder for somebody to feel like we can, build a life together. I've spent all these years alone already. Like, what's the next, like, 40 years if I live that long, So, uh, I don't think that it's a matter of just categorizing people and being like, well, at a certain age, they're either jaded or they're set in their ways. I think marriage, regardless, is difficult. I think when you get married younger, you have a different set of challenges. And then when you get married older, it's a different set of challenges. It could be related to, uh, being set in your ways, I guess you can say. And again, that applies to, I think, men and women. I think what's critical is that during the process, you're always working on yourself, right? So when you're single, you're working on yourself. Like, okay, am I a flexible person? Am I somebody who is able to adjust to different settings, right? And again, that's not for the purpose of marriage that you want to do that, just so you could live a better life, I think, for a person to kind of be just rigid, it's, even if you're single or if you're married, it's not going to be of benefit to you, right? So I think that's what I mean when I say like working on yourself. You want to be able to try to every day work on yourself to become a better version of yourself, right? And sometimes that may require healing, right? You may have gone through different things in life and maybe therapy is needed or whatever it may be, but it's not so much, again, for the purpose, I'm doing this because I want to get married. I'm doing this because I want to be the best version of myself. And then when you focus on that, then if marriage is meant to come for you, then it'll make the marriage, I think, a little bit easier.
Mm. Right. So it's about cultivating good character, irrespective of external circumstances.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
Husna, let's move on to the topic of marriage, shall we? If you would like to share with us, what would you say are the things that have worked for you in your marriage, the challenges, navigating that process?
I would say that, you know, this is something I wonder about. Like, if my experience of the challenges in marriage is the same as somebody who gets married like in their 20s or, early 30s. I would say challenges are definitely having to adjust to somebody else, and and the expectations. I always try to tell myself, okay, if I have a certain level of expectation from my husband, am I voicing it to him? Because I can't expect that he is a certain way with me if I don't tell him what my needs are. He's not going to just automatically know. So I think managing expectations has been something that's been different. Also, I think just getting used to having somebody after being single for so long, I think realizing that you have somebody else that you should be thinking about all the time in terms of like making decisions. So like if I have plans to, see a friend next week, that's something that I should tell my husband about. This is what I have going on. So I think I think those things seem to be like, things that take a longer adjustment, at least for me, and I'm sure it's different for different people. Um, yeah.
What would you say about conflict resolution?
Conflict resolution, I'll tell you, just from my experience, that's something that's been difficult for me because I think what happened for me is that I was single for so many years and I've never experienced such a close level relationship as you do, with my husband. And I think that applies just in general in a marriage. That's the closest relationship you have. So I think in other relationships, if you're more of like an easygoing person, you can be like, okay, well, I'm gonna let that go, or that's not a big deal, or you can step away and then come back to whether it's like a friendship or a relationship with a sibling or even a parent, really, right? That's almost a completely different dynamic. I think with a spouse, that's definitely been something that's been a little bit more challenging for me because I'm not used to talking about what upset me or what bothers me. So that's but I see the value of it. I know how critical that is. And for me, sometimes I think it's more about like I don't want to say the wrong thing or I don't want to say something, out of anger. I want to take time to like cool down and then express what I need to. But then what happens is usually once I've cooled down, then I don't want to think about it anymore. So then I don't talk about it or bring it up. And that's also not good because then it kind of just sits there. So I think the one thing that I've been trying to work on myself is if I'm feeling a certain way to just bring it up in that moment so we can resolve it. I think that's such a critical thing in a marriage, but again, that's something that I seem to be struggling with a little bit.
When it comes to offering advice to other women out there who are on the same journey, what would you say to them?
I don't want to sound cliche. I remember being single and getting advice on marriage and just wanting to roll my eyes. So I'm gonna try to be very careful as I say this. I think first thing is just work on yourself and work on contentment in your life because that you don't know what's going to happen, right? The reality is we don't know where like our life journey is going to go. So I think first and foremost, work on the contentment, work on living your life, you living your best life, honestly. Work on living your best life and work on your own I think everybody has some level of healing to go through, right? Whether you've lived like a blissful life, I mean, we're in the dunya, it's not possible to have had no issues. So work on your own healing journey. I think what we're seeing now is people really realizing that, okay, I have some things that I went through that I want to be able to work through. So I think that's important. I would say number one, that working on yourself. And number two, just don't give up. I think for me, the one thing I can say over the past, the 20 whatever years that I was actively looking to meet somebody is, yes, I went through major dips and then would come back up. I think that's okay. Just don't lose hope. Just don't lose hope and give everything a chance. That's the one thing that I did. And I do feel like whether I did all those things or not, somehow I would have ended up, this last app was the app. If I hadn't even done any effort, maybe I would have ended up on this app at the time that I did and met my husband. But I do think that effort is important. It's just something that Allah asks of us. So I think don't get intimidated by the avenues that are out there right now. There's more and more organizations, more and more groups that are beginning to try to understand the needs of single Muslims in our community, and they're trying to build resources for them. And a lot of them are not perfect. A lot of them have a long way to go. I could list out all the things that I would feel like would be improvements to all these things. So I think it's important not to get jaded by that. I remember when I was in that process of doing things and like my other single friends, whether we attended an event or were on whatever platform, and they would just get really like down, like, oh, why do they do it this way? They didn't think about this. And it's true. Yeah, these are all valid complaints, but don't let it get you down. These are at least efforts that people are making that didn't exist before to try to connect people. So I think that's something that we should be grateful for. And I remember feeling grateful that there was even an opportunity for these resources to exist. I guess for someone like me, it was important to be able to try as much as I'm saying, like, maybe things are going to work out the way they're going to work out. But if I look back now and if I didn't put in those efforts, I think it would have been a lot harder for me to be single. I think it would have caused me to maybe even be more negative or maybe more down about the whole process of trying to meet somebody. So I think whatever avenues exist, don't let it intimidate you, and just go for trying out something new that maybe you haven't before. So I think don't give up, you know, um, don't give up and just trust in Allah, like just trust in Allah. I think that's in the journey of marriage, what I realized is like the real journey is actually our relationship with Allah. And so regardless of what happens in your life, it's like Allah is really just trying to bring you closer to Him. So even through marriage, it's like it's about our relationship with our Creator. So I think again, sometimes I know like hearing this, it's gonna be like some people may be like rolling their eyes if they've been single for a long time and looking, and I apologize because I could really truly understand your sentiment. But just just don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. Keep trying and just live the life that's gonna give you satisfaction, obviously within our bounds, but that would be my advice.
Thank you, Husna. Excellent advice. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I wish you and your husband all the best and a flourishing family, inshallah, in the future.
I mean. Thank you so much, Sumaya. This was like a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.